Okay, my name is Joanna Nelson, and I am with the New Mexico Economic Development Department. And I am the chair of the Sustainable Economy Task Force on behalf of Secretary Alicia J. Keys for the Economic Development Department. And I want to go ahead and call the Sustainable Economy Task Force meeting to order. Today is the 16th. This is our first meeting of 2022, so I'd like to welcome everybody. It's great to see you all. Again, thank you for joining us during this really busy time during legislative session. I don't know what we were thinking when we set this meeting during this time, but I recognize that we had to delay our last two meetings, so it's great to be here. And I'm going to pull up the agenda. We've got that. And so hopefully everyone has the agenda. I'll put the link in the chat if you don't have that. And I want to remind folks that because of COVID and the pandemic adaptions for hosting meetings, we are following the Open Meetings Act, and we are recording this. This will be posted to our website on EDD. And when you do make a comment, if you can please make sure and say your name as well as your agency, and that'll adhere to the new adaptions as well. Any minutes or notes that we take, we'll post those online too. So Felicia DePaula, who's with EDD, could you go ahead and take roll call and we'll get started?
Yeah, no problem. Lucinda Saito. Okay, Stephen Moisey or Charlie Woolman.
Present.
And Felicia, could you go ahead and
Perea?
Felicia, could you go ahead and state their agency that they're representing to for our reference?
Sure. Elaine Perea, Public Education Department.
Here.
Leo Delgado with DFA, the Department of Finance Administration.
Present.
Stephen Varick with Public Lands.
Present.
Lynn Trujillo or Melanie Ritchie with Indian Affairs Department.
Present.
All right, Tom Cole or John Garcia with General Services Department.
Good morning, Tom Cole is here.
Thank you, Tom. Dr. Anna Linden Weller or Alyssa Latucci with EMNERD.
Hi, Anna Linden Weller here. You don't need to use the title. I don't know why that's on there. It's fine.
We will remove it. Yolanda Cordova with DWS.
Here.
Thank you, Yolanda. Justin Garote with NMED, the Environment Department. Amber Rodriguez with Higher Education.
Here.
And Joanna Nelson with NMEDD.
Thanks, Felicia. And we will have to add one more member and we'll go ahead and make that announcement. We'll move forward. But James Popivois, who I think you're on, James, was
Yes.
Great. Hey, James, this is our newest member to the task force. James was appointed chair of the Sustainable Economy Advisory Council, and now will be representing that group in the task force. So thanks for joining us, James. We'll make sure you make the official roster and roll call.
Thanks. Thank you, Johanna.
And
And Joanna, this is Steve Moise. I'm sorry I was on mute. I'm trying to juggle about 3 calls simultaneously. So if I'm on and off, please excuse that.
You are excused. Thank you so much for being honest. I know we're juggling a lot right now, all of us. So thank you so much.
Glad
Even
to be
for
with you.
1/3 of your time, it's very valuable. So thank you so much.
My pleasure.
we'll try to be as succinct as possible. So the first item on our agenda, which I posted in the chat, and apologies, our deputy, his picture is showing up when I post anything. We are using his account. So, but that link that you see in the chat, you can access the agenda. And I want to remind folks too that any information pertaining to this task force can be found on that website, minutes, recording, and agendas. So you can stay up to date with not only the task force, but the Sustainable Economy Advisory Council. The minutes from our last meeting, which was in November, are posted there. And we do have an item on our agenda to approve those previous minutes. So if anyone would like to make a motion, and we can get that called to a vote.
I move to approve the minutes. Suzanne Burr Rodriguez.
Second, Steve Eric.
Great. Thank you so much. We've got a movement to approve and a second. So we will call that to vote. And instead of doing unanimous, is there anyone that does not make a movement to support the approval of those minutes? Okay, we will take a unanimous vote then in approval. Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to the next item on our agenda, and that is to give you an update on the recent progression within the Sustainable Economy Advisory Council. So again, a reminder and a fresher, I think is relevant and pertinent here because we haven't met since November, and that was our first meeting. But the SEEK is what we're calling the Advisory Council as an acronym. They are tasked with helping to provide recommendations on actions for this group. And as mentioned, they did appoint a chair, that's James Pobibois, who will be in our group. And at the last meeting, at the last two meetings, there was discussion about the working groups that they will be forming. And I'd love to turn it over to James to share a little bit of insight into those working groups and what was established. And then the next thing that will kind of run over into the next agenda item is working groups for this task force. And I'd love to throw that out to this group for brainstorming if you would like to set up a working group. At this point, I want to make that opportunity and we can discuss and vote on that. But we'll first hear some discussion and updates from James. So James, I'm going to turn it over to you to discuss the working groups from the SEEK.
Absolutely. Thank you, Johanna. I appreciate it. And it's really great to be with all of you. I also just wanted to thank all of you in your capacities and your different departments for serving on this task force. It is, as you all know, I think an incredibly important task force for establishing an economic future for our state that does not destroy our air, land, and water and ensures that all communities thrive. So I'm very excited to be working with you all. As Johanna was saying, we established a working group for the Sustainable Economy Advisory Committee, and that is a planning working group. We will meet before the end of the month to review our internal processes for the advisory committee. To give you a quick review of who is on the advisory committee, it's a 14-member community led and represented body. A large majority of those are tribal appointees. I believe there are 8, and then there are 7 from communities around the state. I think we have a really great team, and we're looking forward to doing the best that we can to support the task force work. And Johanna, I think that's probably enough of an update. If you want to talk about one of the other things that we are going to do in that working group.
Sure. Thank you so much, James, and really excited to have you on board. And thank you for your time and serving in the chair capacity. So moving on to the next item, which is very much in unison with the working groups. We put on here the discussion of a contractor because within Senate Bill 112 from that last legislative session that creates this board, it does create a recurring fund of $100,000 for each calendar year. So we do have $100,000 for the use and application and to support the effort of this group. So it was discussed at the last SEEK meeting to utilize some of that funding to help with the coordination and the compiling of this effort to update the state comprehensive economic development plan. And I'm going to go ahead and I did create a Jamboard to just kind of kick off this discussion, and I'll try to share my screen really quick. Because I think that this helps to, hopefully you can see, can you see this Jamboard here? Okay. Hopefully this can kind of frame.
Johanna, sorry to interrupt.
Sure.
I think you might have to change the share settings. When I opened the link, it required access approval.
Ah, exactly. Thank you so much. I will update that really quick. Thanks for being patient. Okay, should be updated. But this is just a whiteboard to show some of the elements that we have been discussing and how we are approaching this work with the overall arching understanding that we are tasked with updating the plan, making sure that the voices of underserved communities are represented and diversifying the economy. So as you can see, I put here in bold text some of those buckets of key activities that will need to be addressed. Editing the plan, what is missing, what needs to be added, what needs to be changed. Plan implementation, how do we actually take this document and how do we take action on it? And I've gone ahead and started the conversation and put some notes that were brought up in previous SEEK meetings. And you can kind of get some fuel here for your thinking. Said population engagement. And I want to clarify that acronym. That stands for socially and economically disadvantaged groups. So it's going beyond just racial or ethnic groups, but it's looking at gender, it could be geographic location, veteran status, et cetera. Socially and economically disadvantaged population engagement. How do we make sure that we are listening and accurately representing the concerns, the ideas, the needs of these groups? And then how do we make sure that engagement, and maybe that's crossing over into the implementation, that those groups are being engaged with in the implementation of the plan. This is kind of overarching all of these. Then there's also the plan coordination. This was a major factor that got brought up in the development of the statewide plan. We came across, I think, about 60 plans that exist in New Mexico that have economic development overlaps or similar missions to economic development. So this might be local, regional, state agencies, et cetera. And I have put a tab here to make sure that we are highlighting the DWS study, which is specifically called out in the act, to make sure that we are coordinating the work of that plan into the state economic development plan. I also put the Council of Government regional plans. In fact, we are presenting, myself and Jennifer Myers, who's our recovery coordinator, are presenting to the Council of Governments, to their state organization today called Newmark, because we have gathered information from them, specifically from the COG directors, that we can do a better job at coordinating and making sure that the work that they've done with their regional plans is making it into the state plan. So I wanted to put these two key factors here for us to consider. And then there's also resource coordination. How are we making sure that the resources, especially with federal stimulus money that is coming down, are making it to our priorities that we are identifying within the plan? How do we make sure that there's a coordination in those investments and we're actually utilizing them to the best of our ability, and we're leveraging that funding? So these are just to get the conversation started. Again, this is our second meeting. We still very much are building this as we're going. And I threw these up there, and I'd love to open it up to discussion as we are developing our approach of how to update the plan and how to implement the plan. And I want to throw out that date that is called out in Senate Bill 112 that requires this group to have a finished product by October and present to the legislative committees in October. So that puts a timeline on it. James mentioned that we will be starting the process of getting a contractor on board to help not only actually update the plan for us, but help coordinate a lot of this work as well. It will be great when we bring that person or organization on board, that we can have some feedback and some work ready to go when they hit the ground. So I'd love to throw this out to you. Is this missing the mark? What are we missing? What feedback do you have? And feel free to type directly on this document. If this doesn't fit, you can start another page right here and add your thoughts. And feel free to just chime right in. Anybody have any suggestions?
Johanna, I think
Sure.
I see Anna Linden with her hand up.
Hi, Anna Linden, go ahead.
Hi. So overall, I think this is a really great place to start. And I want to immediately add some things. So in terms of plan coordination, one of the things that we need to figure out how to coordinate and kind of normalize together is what the climate change task force is planning on creating this year in the next 6 months to create what is functionally a state climate plan. That needs to be deeply interwoven in both directions with this plan. So that's one big thing. And secondly, in terms of resource coordination, and I guess going back to something that you said earlier, Joanna, about working groups and maybe starting to think about what those might look like. As of about 9 p.m. last night, the Community Energy Efficiency Block Grant Bill passed the Senate, and that means it's on the governor's desk, and it's an MNERD hosted program, which we're super, super excited about. I personally am really happy about this. And I want to have that not just be something that is a material improvement, but is also an economic improvement. It has an apprenticeship program in it. It has incredible opportunities for development of a clean energy workforce that isn't in the power sector, which I think is super important for this overall thought process. And I want to make sure that we figure out how to coordinate that with what we're doing here. And I mean, we only knew we were going to get it last night, so this is all real new, but.
Anna Linden, thank you so much for bringing up those really important points. So glad that you're here to have reminded us of the important work the Climate Change Task Force is focused on. I'm curious, how do you see us collaborating in the best way with that group and those efforts and that report? Do you think that there should be a specific working group between the two that we're engaged in communication on a regular basis, or how do you see that working?
I'm talking off the cuff here, so I'm not sure that this is the best way or the way that Secretary Cottrell Probst and Secretary Kenny will want to do this work. I'm Secretary Cottrell Probst designate here, and sometimes her designate on the other one. But I think that having a cross collaboration, not like a check-in, but like I'm thinking about conference committees given the legislative session, like a conference committee. Like we make sure that we aren't duplicating each other, but we are reinforcing each other. And the climate change plan is not written yet. So the economic plan is going to be first. So it's more feeding from here into the climate change plan, so that what we create there reinforces and enables what we're creating here. Just in terms of
Johanna, Anna Linden, can I chime in here? This is James Poviwa.
Please.
Thank you. I mean, I think that this all makes a lot of sense. I think that one of the things that I wanted to elevate that the Climate Change Task Force has developed is an advisory committee, just like the Sustainable Economy Task Force has its advisory committee. The Climate Change Task Force also has its advisory committee. And just to elevate the really good work of MNERD and the Environment Department, there were equity principles that were developed over the last year that I think have a lot of application, especially to economic development, sustainable economic development. I believe that the Climate Change Task Force has reviewed that, and that is something I think may be adopted. I'd be happy to share, well, I hope that MNERD might be able to share those principles at some point. And a big part of the work that I think we as a task force have to engage is justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And I think that, I can add it to the Jamboard, or if someone else could. I think that's part of the working groups that we should consider. So I think that it is in alignment, and I hope that we can figure out how to communicate across these different task force, because there is a lot of synergy that needs to happen to tackle both climate change issues and sustainable economic development.
James, thanks for the comment. And I'm making a note to your point about the JEDI work, and taking an opportunity to share that we have created a new role within EDD, and that is the JEDI coordinator, Justice, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion coordinator. I think that that effort is being supported in the legislative session, hopefully to get additional staff there as well. And so James and I spoke earlier about making sure that that JEDI coordinator is looped into this work, as well as the advisory council, and maybe that's a conversation as well as how is that position incorporated into the MNERD climate change work as well. And then Anna Linden, to your other point about you had mentioned some exciting things happening hopefully in this session. And I put maybe we are getting some type of a legislative update to provide this group in the advisory council of the relevant things that have transpired within the legislative session, including the ones that you just mentioned. And that can help form a discussion maybe around the resource coordination, planning coordination, et cetera. So is that in alignment with do you think that would be helpful to your point that you raised earlier, just so everybody's on the same page? And
Yeah, I think
what
it
you're
would be
talking
super helpful. It would be great if we were having this meeting on Friday and we knew how everything will shake out. So maybe what we could do would be to have, for each of us, because we come from so many different agencies, to send maybe to Joanna a summary of things that got passed or budget items that are relevant once everything has finally settled. And then we could distribute that to the SEEK and to each other and just know what the universe is.
I think that would be really helpful. We could informally try to do that, and I can send an email out to the group after this and politely request any priority lists that your representative or your respective agencies have. And I think that would be really helpful. And we have an organization in the state called New Mexico IDEA, that's an association of economic developers. And they do contract with an organization that helps call relevant legislative actions. And maybe we can enlist them to help as well if we're missing anything. But I think it's a great idea. So I will make a note to do that and politely request that from you guys' busy dockets of activity. So thank you so much. And then Deputy Secretary Cordova, I saw you had your hand up. Do you have?
No, I mean, I think my question was answered. What popped into my head was just the conversation about the funding that was coming through and a potential interest around an apprenticeship piece. I'm still trying to wrap my head around what we're doing. So, because, if we really want to articulate, I mean, one is building the jobs into this area, right, to this type of sector that we need to have. We obviously need to have a talent pipeline. We need a talent pool that's going to be able to fill those jobs. And that's really where we fit in all of this, right? I mean, what is going to be the talent pool that's needed so that we can make sure that it's getting done? And so I worry on the back end for us on the workforce side in terms of what is the talent pool that's needed. That needs to be made really clear to the workforce board so that we can make sure that as we're recruiting or we're developing a talent pipeline for this, we're really clear on what is needed and when it's needed, so that we could be upfront with that, because it's not just the boards themselves, but it goes back to education. So we have to be able to articulate back to the community colleges and to higher ed so that we can make sure that they're in alignment and that they're creating training programs that are going to be relevant to what we're asking for. So on that whole engagement and alignment and plan coordination, you've got us down for, is that Department of Workforce Solutions study? I was curious about what that meant.
Sure. Thank you so much for the comment. That is, can you see my screen that I just switched? Okay. That is called out in the act. And I was going to pull this up too, and point folks back to here if there's any, this does pretty well lay out.
Enlarge it just a little bit.
Oh, sure. Let me do that.
There you go. Okay.
But again, this lays out really well what we're tasked to do, and it is updating the plan, implementing the plan, and making sure we're engaging underserved communities. But it calls out the New Mexico Clean Energy Workforce Development Study, which I probably inaccurately keep referring to as the DWS study.
Okay. All right.
So this is what I'm talking about.
All right.
But specifically, how are we making sure that all of that work is incorporated in the next iteration of the state plan. So if I can get
Okay.
back here, I'm gonna.
Yeah, Johanna, I just put the link to the study, Deputy Secretary. I actually worked pretty closely with the University of New Mexico, who were contracted to do this study. And the study was really kind of on the heels of, it's in the Energy Transition Act. And the point of the study was to identify opportunities and barriers for communities around the state to advance in a renewable energy economy. So this study was conducted in 2020 during the height of the pandemic, and then also during the oil and gas bust that we experienced in early 2020. So I encourage folks to take a look at that study, and I am happy to present on it alongside the experts at UNM who were behind the study itself.
Great, thanks, James. And I was going to add one more thing to your point, Deputy. Remind folks that that state plan can be accessed here at eddstateplan.com. But here we've got pretty clearly the overarching challenges that were identified in that first round. And so your comment about workforce development and aligning with higher ed and industry, a lot of that discussion happens in segment 3 about there being a misalignment between industry needs and training and workforce. And you've also got a lot of overlap with section 3 that deals with diversifying the economy, which obviously is a big mission of this group. In our plan currently, it does go into each nine industries and then goes into depth about specifically within those industries like aerospace, film and TV, et cetera. What are the strategies to help develop those industries? And then again, here's the approaches and the priorities of each one of these challenges that was identified. We've got the overarching priorities, and then within each one of those priorities, that's where we have the action plan. And it's really this document, the action plan, that we're looking to, again, going back to this, what do we need to edit? How are we going to implement it? And I think that goes a little bit to what you were saying, Deputy, to that section of workforce development aligning with industry needs. How are we implementing it? How are we coordinating? So I just want to take that opportunity to point people there too for other reference. But thank you for that point. I think it's really, that's a big, bold, underscored point that we need to make sure is continued throughout all of this work. All right. And thanks so much for the great discussion. I'm seeing 2 people with their hands up. And first on my screen, I think actually, Steve, you might have been first. Okay, is that okay, Amber? Even though I see you first, but I think Steve has had his hand up longer. So thanks for being patient, Steve. I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks. I think Amber might actually beat me, but I don't really recall. I just had a couple comments. First of all, I think the plan is very solid, which is really important because that's the baseline, the economic development strategy that we're drawing upon, I guess, is a base. So that I think is going to be really helpful. But 2 things I think related to strategic plans in general that we're aware of, particularly as a sustainable economy plan gets done, would be in the economic development plan. There's a lot of really good stuff there, but it's a lot. I mean, there's just so much. So I see prioritization as a real important need. And I think probably for this group, I mean, I think we've got really sounds like really good input from the tribal communities with the advisory committee and in other communities throughout the state. That's going to be really important to make sure that it's just not all statewide perspective, but addresses, you know, concerns of individual communities and tribal groups. But we also need to be, of course, looking at the statewide perspective. And I think that's going to be really important probably for this group to ensure that while we're addressing the community needs, that also we're not losing track of the larger strategic issues that really affect the state as a whole. And so I think priorities are really important for that as we go through all of those different recommendations that have been made. I can see part of it just be the discipline to try to help determine, you know, what is first tier, what is second term, what is third term or tier, I should say. The other thing is with all these plans, because there's so much, implementation is going to be a particular challenge. And so because there's going to be annual updates, we really need to figure out ways to track progress in areas that haven't progressed and what needs to be done to make those changes. So I think that was anticipated by EDD and others, but that's going to be, you know, that's going to be a continuing challenge probably for this group. I just want to say, I mean, in terms of where to go, Jen had put down a couple of these would be implementation and coordination. I'm really glad. I think it was a good move to go ahead and get the COGS engaged in the central role that they are, because, you know, it should help us a lot. I mean, not that we don't need to be engaged, but because of the fact that the COGS have been in place. I mean, as a day job, they do implementation, they do coordination, they find source of revenues, particularly from the federal standpoint and state standpoint, to go ahead and fund these initiatives. And so I think that's a good thing to have the COGS involved. And then I'm also, I mean, frankly, part of what I'm doing, even though I guess is rambling right now, my apologies for that, would be, you know, what partners are in place already that could handle a large portion of this. And so I really like the fact that COGS will be a key player, and the fact that they've got this more formalized statewide coordination, I think is a good thing. But I also really like Joanna's suggestion to go ahead and get the economic development community engaged in a big way, because the whole state is covered by economic development organizations that are typically public-private entities, you know, so you've got a cooperative approach right off the bat. They're used to implementing economic initiatives. Some are better than others, you know, in terms of the ecological and environmental aspects, I guess. But I mean, you've got regional coverage of essentially the whole state, along with the regional reps that EDD's got. And so I really see them as a key partner. And as Jen had mentioned as well, you know, you got a statewide organization that can help coordinate that as well through New Mexico IDEA. I think that was pretty much it. I mean, I think we got a good base, but clearly we've got a lot of work to do as well. And I think a lot of it's just going to be the discipline to figure out what's most important, what has statewide benefit to it, and you know, who can we use as partners to make this a more efficient process going forward. That's all I had.
Steve, thank you so much for those comments. I think they're really valid. I know that at the last SEEK meeting, EDD conveyed that our team is looking at the plan to create a list of priorities. To your point, kind of assessing the tiered approach of what's in progress, et cetera. So I think that can be really helpful, and that will be presented to the SEEK, and we can of course share that with this group too. And because of legislative session, it has been kind of pushed down the line, but now that it's ending, I know EDD will have more time to focus on that. So thanks so much.
I actually had just had one more question that just came up, sorry. So you'd asked the question of us, like what task forces might our group want to have established, I guess, and I really want to kind of direct it back to you because I know you and many others at NMEDD have been looking at this thing really close. So like, are you seeing gaps between the advisory council and the needs that exist out there that you would see us, this group, addressing through task forces, or anything that really comes to mind in terms of the economic development perspective?
Steve, I don't off the bat, but thanks for the question. I'll make note of that and share that findings. I'll share with leadership too if there's an obvious gap somewhere. But I think it's a good question and something to keep in mind.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks so much. All right, Amber. Thanks for being patient.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I just, I think like Yolanda said earlier, I'm still myself getting my head around, sort of what our task is, what my role can be here, how I can be helpful. And I just wanted to share some initial thoughts from reading the executive summary and looking at the plan. I'm here representing the adult education space, the adult education system, really in the state. We're housed here at HED, and one thing I wanted to just speak up for, I guess, is the idea of making sure that we explicitly include the adult education system in the state as part of the, as we're thinking about, the power that we have to leverage. I think these as I looked through the executive summary, like I said, and the plan, there wasn't much mention of adult education specifically, although we did, of course, talk about higher education. But I think it's important just to note really the power and the potential of these programs for helping to achieve a lot of the main goals that are listed in these plans. And I think that we should probably explicitly discuss those, as we're going through, because I think that if you think about, I'm looking at the challenges of the misalignment between higher education and industry, and the priority of reimagining education and training. I think that in adult education, one of our main, really our overarching goal, I would say, if you had to summarize it with just one sentence, would be we're about reducing barriers for adults, and our major focus is equity and inclusion. And a lot of this reimagination is, happily, already occurring or in process. And I'd be interested in seeing how we can leverage the power of the participation, the participants in this meeting, the cross-agency convening in order to, even better support the work that we're doing, and to try to take it to a new level. And I'll just mention two things that occurred to me as we were talking and I was reading. The first is that in adult education, we have this model that we've been really emphasizing the last few years called Integrated Education and Training, or IETs. And these are programs that that help adult learners, either earn their high school equivalency or improve their English language proficiency skills while they're in training for an actual career or a post-secondary, entrance into a post-secondary career pathway of some sort. And we have a lot of them now popping up around the state in sustainable industries, and solar and wind and healthcare, which I definitely consider to be part of the sustainable, landscape. And I think that, as we think about where those are coming up, we could use the partnerships that we have here and the different agencies that we have convened to help us better, partner with industry and develop these IETs and, leverage the resources that we need in order to develop these very effective programs, but also, programs that are challenging to put together, especially for a small adult education program. So I think that's something for us to think about. There's this work is already underway, right, in different places, and to be able to connect and to support the work that's already getting done, and making sure that these really good, research-based approaches are being supported and acknowledged as we move forward in the first idea. And then, of course, I think Johanna, and probably a lot of you here already know that the HED and adult education specifically are working on a Jobs for the Future, or JFF initiative with many of you here. And a lot of the issues that are being raised in those meetings and as we move forward towards a plan with JFF align very well with this stuff here. And so I think that we should keep that in mind as well, because we're already working together on that. And it's very similar in terms of reducing barriers for adults and socioeconomically disadvantaged groups, and helping them move into post-secondary education and training opportunities.
Thank you so much, Amber. And I'm not sure if it was on my end, but the audio was breaking up a little bit toward the end.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Yes, I like the last thing I said was just that I think that the JFF partnership, adult education, HED, and a lot of our organizations here, and this plan that we're currently discussing are all about reducing barriers ultimately for socioeconomically disadvantaged community members to access adult education, access post-secondary education and training. And I just want to make sure that we're aligning and considering the work that's being done in these other areas, and working together to support the work that's already getting done on these fronts.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad you brought that up, because it's really important. Who is sitting on those JFF meetings from EDD? Just out of curiosity.
It's funny, Joanna. I thought it was you. So I will look, and I'll tell you in the chat in a moment.
Okay. I don't want to duplicate efforts. If there's somebody in our staff that I can just go to and figure out, get updates from them, I can do that. And then, or
I don't think that there was somebody from EDD at the kickoff planning meeting. There was Michelle Velarde from DWS, and then Michelle Amber from your
Michelle
shop.
Ribeiro, yeah.
Riviero, and then and me and Mark from your shop as well. Mark, data guy.
I'm seeing okay. I'm seeing an email saying that there was a meeting that was, I thought, for yesterday, that was a Wesley Painter and Secretary John Clark, or who on the email that I.
Okay.
Just from EDD perspective, but I'll email you the emails.
Okay. And
forward you the emails.
John's our deputy, so I can get with him too, but it'd be great to follow up with you, Amber, on those great points, and make sure, that's a fantastic starting point when we bring this contractor on board to help us take these ideas and get them actually into the document. So it'd be great to see any planning. All the research you just mentioned is fantastic. It's wonderful. And I can't wait to learn more about this IET approach too.
Exciting, really.
So anything you have, feel free to pass it on. And if you'd like, we can share it with the group as well, because I think it's extremely relevant. And maybe I'm thinking too, as we're moving along, it'd be great to highlight the work, maybe from JFF specifically, highlight the work from the climate task force, highlight the work that that DWS is doing as well. So I'd love to throw that out to the group as well, if you have ideas, or if you want to.
Oh yeah, that'd be
volunteer.
fun. Sure. That would be a lot. Wouldn't it?
I love all the secondary conversations. But if you want to take the opportunity and share with the group, just let me know. Reach out anytime and we'll get you set up for the next meeting, because this is wildly fascinating and extremely relevant. So thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you.
And Anna Linden, I saw you were the next one with your hand up.
This will be really quick. I don't want to take up too much of the group's time, but I was just thinking about the tiered approach, and the plan is large, because these things are useful and true, but I don't want to lose anything by setting priorities like but we have these 10 areas, but we're only really going to concentrate on 3.
Mhm.
So, and this is one of those suggestions that creates more work for people, and therefore I feel kind of bad about it. But I think that one of the things that we need to consider doing is, for each of our target areas and target industries, expanding outward and creating a separate document that goes into more detail.
Hmm.
And I actually think this is kind of an equity and access question as well, because especially for people who don't have resources, including the resource of time in small communities, in nonprofits, who might want to really engage on the subject they understand and can contribute to, but can't get through 200 pages of things on things they aren't involved in. We might want to consider, in addition to the overarching plan, creating separate, shorter, targeted, more detailed items. And that's just something to consider as we continue forward. But I know that people who have only worked in one area might not feel competent to, or capable of, or interested in putting in the effort to understand the whole landscape, but might be really great contributors in their area of expertise to the state and to this process. So.
The computer's going a little slow. Anna Linden, I love that idea. And I see Justin's responding too, that he's saying that makes a lot of sense. This document that we put out, it's 400 something pages. The strategy section is 90 pages. And that has been something I know, at least on my mind, I can speak to, is how do you get this thing in bite-sized chunks that people can interact with and engage with? Your comment, I think, is even really exciting and timely, that we can put that into the scope of work, even as we engage with the contractor, of making sure that that's almost a part of a deliverable. And it almost, I'm looking at this plan implementation too. It's something that James and I had spoken about as well. We had thought about the online, somehow there's an online component, which is not a be all solve all, especially thinking about said populations, but it can be one way to do a good job at communicating information or data, or figuring out how we can make that plan as accessible and interactive as possible. So I love it. I think it's really valid. So thank you so much for that comment.
Just want to highlight what Justin said in the chat also about the idea of them being like policy briefs with like specific action items in them, like the best policy briefs have. I love that. I think that's a really great idea. And also that thing you just said about both plain English and accessibility into other languages to the best of our capability, at the very least, maybe Spanish and Dene. I don't know if we have Vietnamese translators that we could do some of this with, but that would be great. Anyway, while I'm dreaming.
Thanks for bringing that up. The language translation has been something that we've been talking about a lot, especially over the pandemic, of how we're not only getting planning information out, but in regard to resources. And so we have funding available, whether through this group or an EDA grant that we received, that we can help provide translation services. So thanks for bringing that up. And I'm gonna switch and I'm seeing Justin's comment, so I'll read that and maybe we'll reach out, translated in Vietnamese. And I know that Justin actually had brought up some other groups to make sure that we're engaging with, like LGBT aligned and environmental justice. And one of the groups we've been in communication with is the Asian Business Collective too, that they're working on translation services as well. So maybe they're someone to reach out to as well. Thanks, Elaine, for being patient. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Hi, Joanna. Thank you for your excellent facilitation skills. This is really a good meeting. I love just hearing everybody's ideas. I had 2 comments that I wanted to add. In regards to the tiered approach and online tracking, I think one of the things that maybe your contractor could help you with is thinking through what can really be measured in a reasonable amount of time, like say 2-3 years, and prioritizing those things, not because bigger picture items aren't important, but because in any effort like this, showing some results, especially fairly early, is important. And so as you think through online tracking and scorecards, your tiering might need to have measurement as one of the top criteria in order to determine what actually we put our effort toward first. And then my second comment is kind of a hard shift. So I wanted to make sure you got that one down. And that is that in the big, long economic development plan, the teacher shortfall was not addressed directly. And in conversation with Tracy Bryant, she suggested to me that that was because teachers are considered to be a net draw on the economy. And I wanted to push back on that and really ask this group to consider the teacher shortage as a critical strategy, because so much of what I've seen is about what teachers can do, what adult ed can do, what community colleges can do. And if we have a broad shortage of people who are engaged in being educators, that's going to be a limiting factor. So I would like to encourage that we consider that as being something that we tackle directly instead of it kind of being a side problem. And of course, Amber's on my side.
Thank you so much, Elaine. Those are great comments and noted. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Patricia is at the top of my screen. I see your hand, James, too. I'm sorry if I'm jumping ahead.
Good morning. My name is Patricia Trujillo, and I'm the Deputy Secretary of Higher Education. It's the end of the session, so I can't even remember what I do anymore. This is my first meeting, and I hopped in a little bit late, but I'm really appreciating the conversation, especially as it pertains to how higher education can really be a part of this overall process. And just a few things that I was already thinking and can share is that, especially as we're thinking about the areas of workforce development, letting you know how some of the work is already getting started. I've been working with a work group that includes membership from higher ed institutions, the National Park Service, and the Forest Service, to really think about our outdoor recreation and outdoor education programs, and how, for instance, we need to refresh and renew our academic programs at higher ed institutions, because many of them have not updated their curriculum in decades, or in some cases, curriculum has even been shuttered because of lack of interest. And so in these moments, it's how do we also, start getting students really invigorated, thinking about the potentialities for these fields. And I'm going to quote President Wells from New Mexico Tech, and he always says that we're in this really interesting moment in higher ed because we need to train students for jobs that haven't been imagined yet, that haven't been created yet, if we're really thinking about this sustainable future. So just knowing that we are having those conversations and would love to have more in the higher ed realm. I would also recommend that in terms of this plan, I don't know if she's been invited, but I would recommend that Kendall Chavez, the governor's food and farm coordinator, be a part of this conversation. We've really been glad at HED to be a part of the food farm and the governor's food farm and hunger initiative that we hope is going to get to her desk by the end of this week. And there is a lot of conversation in that group, which interestingly and in a really positive way has been very community-based, with over 250 members of community farms, industry participating in those conversations almost on a weekly basis. And so a lot of it has been about, healthy climate, about healthy water, healthy soil, and those jobs that pertain to addressing essentially, food issues across the state from a food justice perspective. And so that really connects with what Mr. Poviwa was saying earlier about needing the JEDI component of this. I'm really excited. And the last thing that I would add here is that I've always been very inspired by a filmmaker from Taos Pueblo. Her name is Diane Reina. And she always brings up the point that when we do this work, oftentimes we will bend over backward to do environmental impact statements, which is important and critical. But she also recommends, as somebody from a traditional community in New Mexico, that we also should be doing equity impact statements, right? So that, when we understand when we're doing work in community, what the impact is going to be for the people who are represented in that work or from the land-based perspective. And so I would just really love to give a shout out to her work. That's it for now, but I do just see so much of the interconnectivity. I also see an opportunity, perhaps, as we continue to do our general education matriculation, so making sure that gen ed transfers from campus to campus if students need to go from one campus to the other, but looking at our gen ed to see how it includes coursework for all students in New Mexico in sustainability studies or sustainability related fields. And so we have a lot of opportunity to be a part of the conversation. Thanks.
Deputy, thank you so much for those comments. That was great. And really, I'm trying to think of all the points that you raised, but regarding the work that Ms. Chavez is leading, we're in close communication with her and that work. In fact, I've got to talk to her later today. Great point. I think our challenge is figuring out, again, going back to this overall plan coordination of how do we do that in the most effective way. And I think even the work that she has done and led, which is so impressive and incredible, maybe adding her to the slate of folks to bring to this group to inform about all that work that they've done and hopefully share the report that I know that they just finished up. So thanks for bringing that up. Anything that you mentioned, if you need EDD participation, feel free to reach out and let us know how we can be supportive.
Thanks.
Equity statements. You mentioned a filmmaker. Can you repeat the name of that?
Sure. Her name is Diane Reyna, R-E-Y-N-A.
Can you repeat?
Yeah, it's Diane, and her last name is Reyna, R-E-Y-N-A. And she talks about equity impact statements as like a corollary to environmental impact statements.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I think that can be extremely relevant as we approach this work because it is directly written into the bill, a large part due to Representative Rubio, about how this work will affect socially and economically disadvantaged groups. So thank you so much. I think that could be really helpful. Feel free to send anything related to that. And otherwise, we'll start Googling. Thank you so much, Deputy. And James.
Thank you, Johanna, and thank you, Deputy Secretary Trujillo. And I'm so glad that you mentioned Diane Reyna. I had the privilege to work for her when I was at the Institute of American Indian Arts, and she is quite an amazing woman. From her work on surviving Columbus, the documentary from the 90s with Conroy Chino, very impressive. And I think absolutely appreciate you bringing her into the conversation. There were a couple things noted in the chat that I wanted to just elevate, and that is, I think Justin from the Environment Department mentioned, concern, including environmental justice. And another term that I'll put out there is just transition. And just transition, I think, has been a bit of a nebulous term. And frankly, I think that what this committee, this task force is developing is just transition. And Kendall Jackson's work in her coalition, I think is an excellent model for what the advisory committee that I'm leading can create around economic development. So I'm super excited. I worked very closely with Representative Rubio and Senate Pro Tem Mimi Stewart on the creation of SB 112. And this is exactly what they imagined, was departments figuring out what the synergy is around this topic. So I'm so excited for this conversation today, and I don't want to take up any more time.
Thank you so much, James. Anybody else have discussion around our approach as we're starting to mold these strategies together of how to carry out the mission of and purpose of this group? And again, pointing folks to the bill that lays out how we are supposed to approach this work. And I think we've got some really great notes, and I'll be really looking forward to following up with some of you to get some more detail. James, do you have anything? Your hand is still raised.
Nope. Sorry.
Okay. Oh, no problem. Okay, then we'll move forward. I'll open it up. We do have an item on the agenda if anyone's ready. It didn't appear to me that we specifically have a working group that has been identified, but we do have these great approaches that I think can inform the work that James and the SEEK is doing. Some really great notes and guidance for them, but the floor is open if anyone does have a motion that they want to make for a specific working group for this task force. Okay, I'm not seeing anyone, so we're going to go ahead and move on to the next item. And I do see it, we're a little bit past time, so I'll try to make this pretty succinct. But the next item that we have on our agenda is briefing this group on some of the recent calls for proposals that EDD has launched recently. And I thought it would be appropriate to just make sure you're aware of them. It really falls into this discussion item around resource coordination that I mentioned. How are we making sure that this lifetime opportunity of federal stimulus money is going and being invested into the right places to have the biggest impact and really shift the needle, especially with regard to said populations. First up is the State Small Business Credit Initiative. This is the SSBCI, and the Biden administration allocated $10 billion with a B to states in the country to create credit enhancement programs or investment programs. And so what that means is that credit enhancement is basically enabling states to create guarantee programs on commercial loans. We currently have a collateral assistance program that enables us to support a bank or a micro lender or a CDFI that is creating a business loan for a business owner. There's a shortfall in collateral. So we're able to say, here's a CD to act as an extra risk mitigation. If that loan defaults, then the lender is able to use our CD. So that's an example of a guarantee or a credit enhancement program through this SSBCI. We are planning on putting additional funding into that effort, into what we call the CAP, Collateral Assistance Program. And then as well, there is additional funding that will be put into an equity program, a VC equity program, and that is the current RFI request for initiatives that we have out right now. And I'll put the link in the chat. And we recently had an information session on Monday, and we are asking investors, or I should say equity groups, VC groups, that are interested in applying to submit proposals. And one of the big underarching components or missions of this SSBCI, as well as our RFI, is to get capital into underserved markets, to get capital outside of traditional recipients that a lot of times go to. An example would be a tech company that just that creates that market return. And so this enables us to put funding into efforts that are wanting to see that money go out to companies that might be ESG aligned, environmental, socially, and governance aligned, that are going to socially and economically disadvantaged business owners, rural areas. So if you have any connections with VC firms, equity groups in the state or outside of that are ESG aligned or looking to support innovative revenue models, encourage them to apply. And so I did want to make sure that everyone on the call is aware of that current opportunity. Also, Fund It. Fund It is a way that enables cross collaboration with funding agencies, with state agencies, to prioritize investments, to make sure that those investments are being leveraged to the best of their ability to support economic development projects. And so we recently put out a call for a Fund It coordinator, and hopefully we'll get somebody on board very soon. I want this group to be aware of it because it is an overlap with this work, the cross collaboration and the clearinghouse of resources, as well as identifying projects specifically that align to not only EDD's state plan, but relevant agency plans too. And the link that I'll share is actually, it just has the SSBCI, but I'll try to find the Fund It call and I'll update this group when we get somebody on board. And then the Healthy Food Finance Fund, this is going back to the deputy's point about the food and hunger effort that is being led from the governor's office and specifically Kendall Chavez. Money was allocated in last legislative session to EDD to support the creation of what's called an HFFI, a Healthy Food Finance Fund that will enable us to participate with a CDFI to get funding to projects that are related to solving food justice efforts or food desert efforts or food access issues, access to healthy food. And this RFP just recently closed. So we're working with La Semilla, who's down in Las Cruces, to start that review process and hopefully identify a partner that we can work with and get this moving. So 3 items, going over them really quickly and really briefly to just make sure you're aware of as we begin these conversations of how do we make sure that our resources are being put into relevant areas. And any questions, just let me know. If you need any information, let me know and I'll pass on the links. So moving on to the next agenda item, group updates, discussion. Again, I apologize, we're running over time, but if anyone on the call has any updates in similar fashion that you want the group to be aware of, feel free. I'm turning the floor over to you. So just raise your hand. Okay, I'm not seeing anybody. We've had some great thoughts. And again, I'm going to follow up with Anna Linden's recommendation that we reach out to you. And once the session closes, if you could highlight for us relevant priorities that was supported through the legislative session that could be pertinent to this group, it'd be great if you could share that and we can all collaborate and communicate about that. Okay, next agenda item, public comments. I know we had a few folks from the public joining us, and I will turn it over to anyone that has any feedback. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands raised. And again, I want to especially point out that Daisy Maldonado is joining us. She is she's on the SEEK with on the Sustainable Economy Advisory Council. So thanks so much, Daisy, for joining us. And I will make a motion, or I'll throw it out if anyone wants to make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I move to adjourn the meeting. James,
second.
you what?
I'll second Anna Linden Weller.
All right, I've got a motion and a second. If all in favor, if you want to go ahead and say aye.
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 Wonderful. Are there any opposed? Okay, that concludes our meeting. Thank you so much again for joining us during this really busy time. We got some great feedback and can't wait to report to you all at the next meeting. Again, if you have any agenda items to throw on the subsequent meeting, feel free to email me and we'll get those added as well. I might be reaching out to some of these ideas to give a spotlight to these efforts. So thank you so much for your time. We'll also get a meeting invite for the next meeting on your calendars. Thank you all so much.
Okay, thank
Talk
you.
to you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.